You've been told to find your purpose, like it's out there, waiting, like it's a puzzle piece buried in the right job, the right partner, the right belief system. You scroll through advice, quotes, spiritual guides, desperate to feel like you matter. But here's the truth. Purpose isn't something you find. It's something you create. And most people never do, because creating is harder than believing. You chase meaning because you're scared. Scared that if nothing matters, then neither do you. So you cling to anything that offers a sense of direction. Religion, politics, identity, a relationship, a movement. You wrap yourself in borrowed meanings just to avoid the void. But the void doesn't disappear. It grows, and eventually you feel it again. The weightlessness, the silence, the realization that you've been living inside someone else's answers. This is where most people panic. They run harder. They double down on belief. They get louder, more righteous. They drown in work, in ideologies, in rituals. They try to convince themselves, this is it. This is who I am. This is what I believe. But if they stopped for just a moment, if the noise cut out, they'd hear it. Nothing's there. Because meaning isn't found. It's made. And that terrifies people. Nietzsche didn't preach comfort. He didn't offer hope. He offered a mirror, and what it reflects is brutal. The death of God, the collapse of absolute values, the idea that life has no inherent meaning, and never did. For most, that's despair. For a few, it's liberation, because if nothing is given, then everything is possible. But here's the catch. Possibility demands responsibility. You don't get to lean on ready-made truths. You don't get to say, this is just the way it is. If you want meaning, you have to build it from scratch. And that's bloody work. It means destroying illusions you've called identity, tearing apart beliefs that comforted you, letting go of who you think you're supposed to be, so you can become who you actually are, not who your parents imagined, not who your culture rewards, not who your fear can tolerate. But you, raw, unapproved, unregulated. You won't find yourself in a quote, or a mission statement, or a vision board. You'll find yourself in the rubble of everything you had to kill to get free. You'll feel the loss, the groundlessness, the silence of not being certain. That's not a sign you're lost. That's the beginning of real autonomy. Nietzsche called it a revaluation of all values, a reversal, a revolt, not against the world, but against the lie that life owes you meaning. No one is coming to save you, no system, no God, no ideology, no soulmate, no dream job. And the longer you wait for something to make you whole, the more of your life you waste in waiting. The pursuit of meaning becomes a prison when you think it exists outside of you. When you worship the next answer, the next sign, the next path someone else designed, and you don't even realize it. But you're not searching for meaning, you're searching for permission. Permission to stop, permission to be, permission to matter. But you don't need permission. You need to accept the terrifying freedom of meaninglessness and decide to build anyway. Create without a blueprint, speak without approval, act without applause. That's the birth of meaning. But most won't. Most want structure, certainty, guarantees, so they shrink into labels, into titles, into identities. They outsource their purpose to whatever sounds noble enough, safe enough, collective enough, and they call it belonging, they call it direction, but it's not. It's obedience dressed up as clarity, and still they suffer deep down. They know they've traded fire for comfort, vision for safety, truth for narrative. They feel the ache, but they're too far in to turn around. So they double down again. Louder beliefs, louder identities, louder lies. But you don't have to. You can step into the silence, into the groundlessness, into the terrifying, liberating void of not knowing, and start creating. Not because it's easy, but because it's real. And the truth is, meaning built from the void is stronger than meaning inherited from tradition. Because it's yours. No one gave it to you. No one approved it. It wasn't voted on, blessed, or liked. But it's yours. And once you've touched that, once you've lived one day where your actions are aligned with what you chose to believe, you can't go back. Not to religion, not to dogma, not to the roles they trained you to play. Because when you taste real authorship, borrowed meaning tastes like poison, and that's where it begins. Not with finding your purpose, but with setting fire to the illusion that it was ever lost. What comes next isn't safe, but it's yours. You can't build until something breaks. That's the part they don't tell you. Not in the books, not in the talks, not in the shiny posts about becoming your best self. They show you the after, the glow, the clarity, the purpose, but not the collapse, not the ripping away, not the long, violent undoing of everything you thought you were. But Nietzsche understood. He didn't speak of growth like a gardener. He spoke like a demolitionist. First, destroy. First, clear the ground. First, burn down the illusion. Then, maybe, you can begin. That's why it hurts, not because you're lost, but because you're shedding what was never yours. You say you want to know who you are, but what you usually mean is, I want to know who I am without discomfort. You want truth without blood, but there is no such thing. There is no new self without killing the old one. There is no strength without the death of comfort. The search for meaning begins to rot the moment you expect it to feel good. So when the confusion hits, when your beliefs fall apart, when your dreams collapse under their own weight, don't panic. Don't run back to the old structures. Don't stitch the mask back on. That pain is not the end. It's the beginning. It's not breakdown. It's excavation. You are not meant to be rebuilt. You are meant to be revealed. But revelation demands fire. So burn the myth of destiny. Burn the script they handed you. Burn the gentle story about finding your calling. You are not a puzzle. You are not a plan. You are not a product waiting for the right box. You are chaos, energy, force. And the only way to live is to direct that force, not to search for alignment, but to impose it. That's what it means to create meaning, to stop searching, to start deciding without proof, without consensus, without permission. But that decision feels like death, because part of you has to die for another to lead. The compliant one, the one who asked for signs, the one who clung to virtue, the one who needed to be good, that one dies. And when it does, there will be silence. You'll think something's wrong. You'll feel empty. You'll want to go back to some purpose that felt clean and noble. But don't. Stay in the silence. It's not a void. It's space. The space you never had when you were living inside a cage of borrowed values. In that space, something else begins. Not a voice, not a vision, a choice. Quiet, heavy, yours. That's the burden of freedom. The moment you realize no one is coming to define you, and never was. You have to write it yourself. You have to step out of belief and into authorship without certainty, without applause, without the promise that it'll work out. But here's the secret. Real meaning doesn't need to work out. It doesn't beg for reward. It burns on its own terms. And if you let it, it will burn you clean. Nietzsche didn't want you to become safe. He wanted you to become dangerous, to lies, to comfort, to every voice that said, this is who you must be. He wanted you to become a creator, not a seeker, a builder, not a believer. And to do that, you have to let go of every reason you've been alive until now. Your goals, your ideals, your identity. You have to hold them up to the fire and ask, did I choose this, or was I trained to want it? And if the answer is silence, burn it. Because the truth is, most of what you think you are is just memory, pressure, echoes, a reaction to fear, a performance for safety. But underneath that, if you're willing to go there, is something else, something untrained, something brutal and beautiful and alive. That's the beginning of creation, not art, not words, not buildings. Creation as a life, as a daily decision to not retreat into the warm arms of belief, but to build something colder, harder, truer, something no one handed you. And you'll lose things, comfort, familiarity, sometimes people, because the world isn't built for creators, it's built for believers. Systems are built for obedience. And when you stop obeying, people will call you dangerous, arrogant, lost. But that's just projection. They don't hate your direction. They hate your independence. They don't hate what you say. They hate that you say it without asking. But you weren't made to ask. You were made to choose. Not out of rebellion, out of necessity. Because the alternative is decay. Slow, quiet decay disguised as a stable life. That's the real risk. Not failure, not rejection, but living a life that was never yours and calling it peace. So you must decide, burn or wither, create or consume, choose or be chosen for. And that decision, that brutal, clear, unblessed decision, is the first act of meaning. It's not a destination. It's not a feeling. It's an act. The act of becoming what no one told you was allowed. We go further next. You say you want freedom, but freedom costs. Not just comfort, not just certainty. It costs people. It costs approval. It costs the version of yourself that made everyone else feel safe. Freedom is violent, not because it harms others, but because it destroys the illusions they loved. When you stop chasing meaning and start creating it, you stop being relatable. You stop being predictable. You stop being manageable. And that makes people nervous because they didn't really love you. They loved who you were around them, the quiet one, the agreeable one, the one who believed in the same gods, the same goals, the same story, the one who apologized for being too intense, too ambitious, too raw. That version made sense to them, but the you that starts creating meaning, that version breaks things, not to be cruel, not to rebel, but because creation is destructive by nature. You don't make something new without ruining something old. And often, what's old is everything that held your life together. That's why it hurts. You thought you'd feel free. Instead, you feel lost. You thought you'd feel powerful. Instead, you feel alone. That's because autonomy begins in isolation, not forever, but at first. Because when you stop living through the lens of others, their reflections disappear, and all you have left is silence. That silence is sacred. That's the silence where meaning begins, but it's not pretty. It doesn't come with fireworks. It comes with cold mornings, with friends who drift away, with awkward pauses when your words no longer match their world, with long nights where you wonder if maybe you made a mistake. You didn't. You just stepped out of the script, and once you do, there's no going back. You'll try. Once. You'll go to the gathering, say the polite things, smile through the shallow rituals, and you'll feel it. That ache, that gap between who you are and who you're pretending to be. And it will hurt more than it used to. Not because you've become weak, but because you've become honest. And that honesty makes you incompatible with your old self. Nietzsche knew this. He wrote about the creator, the one who breaks through morality, through tradition, through herd logic, not to be different, not to be better, but to be real. And to be real is to be dangerous. To everyone who still lives in the story you just walked out of. They'll call you arrogant, cold, lost. They'll say you've changed. Of course you have. You're not who you were. You're not who they need you to be. You've stopped performing. And that's the true meaning of freedom, no longer needing to be understood. Once you stop chasing meaning, you stop needing explanations. You stop needing validation. You stop needing alignment with someone else's logic. You stop asking for permission to think, to speak, to live. You just do. You wake up and build. You speak what's true, not what's safe. You act from vision, not habit. And yes, it gets quiet. But that silence, it's not loneliness, it's sovereignty. And in that sovereignty, something grows. Not ego, not rebellion, but weight, gravity, presence. You stop rushing, you stop proving, you stop chasing. Because when you create your own meaning, you don't need to sell it. It just is. You walk into a room and don't shrink. You speak and don't rehearse. You lose things and don't collapse. You face rejection and don't beg. Because what matters isn't out there anymore, it's within. And no one can give it, and no one can take it. That's why they fear you. That's why they try to shame you. That's why they say you've changed. Because people who don't create meaning depend on those who do. They cling to others for direction. They look for reflection, not truth. And when you stop playing that role, they panic. Not because you betrayed them, but because you remind them that they betrayed themselves. That's the violence of freedom. You don't need to shout. Your silence is louder than their sermons. You don't need to argue. Your being is a contradiction to their belief. You don't need to convince. Your clarity is a threat to their confusion. So they will push. They will produce. They will try to drag you back into the story. But you're done playing characters in someone else's play. You're writing your own scene now. And there's no room for scripts you didn't choose. This isn't ego. This isn't selfishness. This is what happens when a person decides to stop begging for purpose and starts becoming it. And yes, you'll still feel fear. You'll still feel grief. But now it's clean. It's not tangled in shame. It's not inherited. It's yours. And that means you can face it. That's the turning point. When your pain stops being something that keeps you small and starts being something that proves you're real, real pain, real choice, real presence, no filter, no mask, no script, just you, finally here. The final part begins now. There's a moment where something shifts. You stop waiting for signs. You stop looking for the next right thing. And without announcing it, without even fully realizing it, you begin. Not by declaring purpose, not by finding clarity. You just stop asking what it all means and start deciding what it's going to mean for you. It's quiet. No one claps. There's no cinematic breakthrough. But from that silence, something starts to move. Not like an idea, like weight, like gravity, like a direction you didn't borrow. You begin making choices that feel unfamiliar. You don't ask for advice first. You don't check how it'll look. You feel it, and you follow. It doesn't feel safe, but it feels true. You don't tell people you've changed. You just stop explaining yourself. You used to reach for meaning like a lifeline. Now you realize you were never drowning. You were just waiting for someone else to give you permission to be real. But no one's going to do that, and that's not the tragedy. That's the turning point. Nietzsche didn't offer comfort. He didn't ask you to find peace. He asked you to become the source of it, to stop worshiping systems, saviors, ideals, and start becoming the kind of person who doesn't need to be saved. That idea still scares you sometimes. You miss the ease of borrowed belief. You miss being told what matters. You miss the structure. But deep down, you know, you were never really safe in it. You were just quieter, smaller, easier to control. You confused that with peace. Now you're choosing something else. Not chaos, not ego, just authorship. It's not about becoming untouchable. It's about becoming responsible, not for the world, just for yourself. And when you step into that fully, things shift. Not dramatically, not all at once, but permanently. You're more deliberate with your time. You let silence linger in conversation. You stop softening your words to keep others comfortable, not because you want to hurt them, but because you're done hurting yourself to avoid conflict. You carry yourself differently. You don't move to be noticed. You move to be clear. You stop entertaining the question, what if they don't like who I'm becoming? Because what scares you more is disappearing back into the version they did like. You've seen too much now. You've tasted a kind of honesty that doesn't need to be pretty to be right. You've sat in the absence of meaning and realized that absence is a blank page. You're not healed, you're not whole, but you're not lost either. You're building, quietly, daily, and it's slow. There's no dopamine rush, no finish line, just a new kind of pain. The kind that comes from standing on your own legs for the first time in your life. And it's worth it, not because everything suddenly feels good, but because it finally feels like yours. Every decision, every word, every step, not repeated, not recycled, not handed to you, built from the ground up. People don't always understand. Some drift, some criticize, some try to pull you back into the framework they need to stay sane. Let them. They're not wrong for staying where they are. But you're not wrong for leaving either. You're not looking to rebel. You're just done obeying by default. You're not trying to impress. You're just done performing. You're not chasing meaning anymore. You're generating it. There's a difference. And you feel it in your bones. You don't need to shout about it. You just live like it. And one day, without realizing it, you'll look around and notice you didn't become someone else. You didn't break everything and start from zero. You just stopped betraying yourself. And that quiet, brutal refusal to keep living a life that felt secondhand, that's where your meaning began. It didn't come from the sky. It came from you, from the part you thought was weak, but was just waiting for space, from the voice you used to silence, that never stopped whispering, from the decisions you made in the dark when no one else was clapping and no one else was watching. This was never about finding truth. It was about stopping the lie. You don't need a purpose to be real. You don't need a name for what you are. You're here, you're awake, and you're willing. That's enough. Not to be happy, not to be certain, but to begin. You don't chase meaning anymore. You carry it.